David had always thought of himself as an ordinary man. He was not a hero, not a soldier, not someone people told stories about. He was simply a mechanic working on the edge of human space, in a dusty colony called Althea 9. His job was to repair mining drones and keep the old machines alive day after day. It was important work, yes, but it felt endless and empty. The colony itself was small and rough. It had a few hundred settlers, most of them too busy with their own lives to notice him. The bars were noisy, the nights were cold, and the silence in his small quarters was the worst part of it all. Every evening David returned to his room, ate the same food and stared at the same metal walls. Loneliness pressed on him like a weight he could not shake off. One night, after a long day of crawling through broken engines and fighting with failing circuits, David sat at his terminal. His hands were dirty, his back ached, and his heart felt heavier than his body. He stared at the blank screen for a long time before typing a request to the central hub. His message was short and almost embarrassed. Personal assistant required. Nothing advanced. Just simple help with daily tasks. He wasn't asking for much. He imagined some standard service unit, maybe one of those small robots with a gentle voice and a simple set of commands. Something that could fetch tools, record logs, and remind him when he forgot to eat or sleep. A machine that would keep him from talking to the walls like a madman. He didn't want a friend. He didn't want a partner. He only wanted something that could make the silence a little easier. When the request was approved, he felt a small spark of relief. For once, maybe his days would not feel so empty. He even caught himself imagining how much smoother his work would go with a pair of hands, mechanical or otherwise, helping him. 2 weeks later, a supply shuttle descended on the colony. David walked to the landing pad with low expectations. He pictured a boxy crate being rolled out containing his simple assistant. He pictured himself dragging it back to the workshop, powering it on and finally having some order in his life. But when the shuttle doors opened, everything he had pictured shattered. A figure stepped out. Not a robot, not even something human-made. It was a tall, slender girl with skin that shimmered faintly under the sun, hair like strands of silver, and eyes deep violet, glowing with an inner light. She moved with a grace that made the rough miners nearby pause and stare. She carried no crates, no machines, only a small pack slung over her shoulder. David blinked hard, certain there had been some mistake. He checked the cargo list on his wrist console, but the data was clear. Assistant delivery registered. The girl stopped in front of him, her gaze fixed on his face as though she had known him all her life. When she spoke, her voice was soft but strong, carrying a strange melody. "Human David," she said slowly, her accent wrapping around his name. "I am your assistant." David opened his mouth and closed it again. Surely she was misinformed. Surely this was someone else's arrival. Before he could speak, she added something that froze his blood. And she paused, lowering her eyes for a heartbeat before looking at him again. "I have chosen you as my mate." The world seemed to tilt. Around them, the noise of the landing pad faded, as if the air itself had grown still. David felt every pair of eyes in the crowd burning into his back, but all he could see were hers. Violet, steady, full of something he could not name. I think there's a mistake," he stammered. "I asked for an assistant. Just work, not this." But the alien girl only tilted her head, studying him as though he was the one who didn't understand. "Yes," she said firmly. "Assistant and mate. It is the law of my kind. We do not serve without bond, and I have chosen you." David's heart hammered in his chest. He had asked for something simple, something without strings. Instead, the universe had placed in front of him a being who spoke of bonds, laws, and choices he had never imagined. And for the first time in years, he felt both terrified and alive. David did not sleep well that night. He kept turning on his bed, staring at the metal ceiling of his small quarters. The words of the alien girl, "I have chosen you as my mate," echoed in his mind again and again, louder than any alarm. He had wanted something simple, a worker, a helper, a neutral machine that could follow instructions. Instead, the central hub had delivered a living, breathing alien who spoke of bonds and laws he did not understand. In the dim light of his room, David rubbed his face with his hands. This is a mistake, he told himself. Tomorrow I'll call the hub. I'll explain. They'll send her back. But even as he thought this, a strange guilt touched him. When Salira had spoken, her voice had not been mechanical or cold. It had been soft, almost vulnerable. The next morning, David walked into his workshop expecting more awkward silence. Instead, he found her already there. Salira stood at the workbench, examining a broken mining drone with delicate fingers. She looked up when he entered, her violet eyes calm and steady. "Good morning, human David," she said. He cleared his throat. "It's just David. No need for titles." She tilted her head as though storing the correction carefully. "David." He moved to her quickly, waving his hands. "Listen, about yesterday. You must understand, I didn't mean for this. I needed help with machines, not a mate." Salira studied him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, neither hurt nor angry. Finally, she spoke in her gentle, accented voice. "I understand your words, but you do not understand my people. We do not give service without bond. I have chosen you. That is my law." Her certainty made him uneasy, but I never agreed. We don't work like that." She only nodded slowly as if she had expected resistance. Then, without another word, she returned to the drone, her fingers moving with practiced skill. David stood there, unsure whether to shout, laugh, or leave. In the end, he sighed and picked up a tool. The day passed in strange silence. She worked beside him, quick and precise. When he reached for a part, she already had it ready. When he mumbled about calibration, she adjusted the circuit without being told. It should have been comforting, yet it unsettled him. She was not a machine. She was watching him, always watching, her eyes like twin stars holding him in place. At lunch, David sat at the small metal table with a plain meal packet. He expected her to eat elsewhere, but Salira sat across from him. From her pack, she drew strange dried fruit that shimmered faintly, breaking it with graceful hands. "You eat this every day?" she asked, nodding at his dull gray food. He shrugged. "It's cheap and easy." She frowned, then slid one of her glowing fruits across the table. "Try." David hesitated, then took a bite. The flavor burst in his mouth, sweet, sharp, alive. For a moment he forgot his confusion. Salira's lips curved into the faintest smile. That night David tried to push her presence from his thoughts, but something happened as he lay in bed. He felt her. Not physically. Her quarters were across the hall. No, it was like a soft whisper brushing the edge of his mind. Not words, just warmth. A connection he hadn't asked for but could not ignore. He sat up sharply, his heart pounding. What is she doing to me? The next morning he confronted her. "Stay out of my head," he snapped. Salira blinked at him, confused. "I did not enter. The bond exists. You feel it because I am near. It is not something I control. It simply is." Her calmness unnerved him more than anger ever could. He rubbed his temples, muttering, "This isn't what I signed up for." Still, as the day went on, he found himself glancing at her when she wasn't looking. He noticed the quiet patience in her movements, the way her silver hair caught the workshop lights, the way her voice softened when she asked simple questions about tools or human customs. He told himself again and again, "This is wrong. She's forcing something I didn't choose." But in the deepest part of his chest, another thought whispered, "And yet, I don't feel as alone anymore." David hated that thought. He hated it because it was true. Days slowly turned into a routine, though nothing about it felt normal to David. Salira remained in his workshop from morning until late evening, working beside him as though she had always belonged there. She didn't ask for breaks, didn't complain about the dust, and never grew tired. Her movements were precise, almost graceful, even when she handled dirty tools and broken wires. At first, David tried to ignore her. He would focus on the machines, keeping his eyes down, speaking only when necessary. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not escape the feeling of her presence. She was always close, always watching with those violet eyes that seemed to see deeper than just his skin. Whenever he reached for a wrench, she already had it ready. Whenever he muttered about circuits, she understood without asking. It should have been helpful, but to David it was unsettling. A robot following commands would have been easier, but Celira was not a robot. She was alive, and she was choosing to be there with him. One afternoon, David grew frustrated. He slammed a drone panel shut and rubbed his forehead. "You don't have to stand so close," he muttered. Celira tilted her head, her voice soft. "I stay near because I am your mate. It is natural." The words struck him like a hammer. He turned sharply. "Stop saying that. I never agreed to it." Her face remained calm, though her eyes softened with something like patience. "You may not have spoken, but the bond speaks. My kind feels it. And I know you feel it too, even if you deny it." David opened his mouth to argue, but the word stuck, because in truth he had felt something. At night, when he lay in bed, there was always that strange warmth pressing at the edges of his mind, like a presence he couldn't shake off. It wasn't intrusive, not painful. It was simply there, and against his will it gave him comfort. But comfort frightened him more than loneliness. Later that evening, Celira surprised him again. When David returned to his quarters, tired and hungry, he found the small table filled with food. Not the dull gray meal packets he usually ate, but dishes made from ingredients she had carried in her pack. Bright fruits, spiced grains, and a stew that smelled richer than anything in the colony canteen. "I made this for you," Celira said simply. David frowned. "You don't need to cook for me." She looked down at the table. "You eat food that tastes of nothing." "It hurts me to see it. A mate should not eat alone in silence." Her words made his chest tighten. He sat down slowly, trying the stew. The taste was alive with warmth and spice, unlike anything he had eaten in years. His throat felt tight as he whispered, "This is good, really good." Celira smiled faintly, the first true smile he had seen from her. "Then I am glad." That night, when he lay in bed, the bond pressed closer. This time, instead of pushing it away, David let it linger for a moment. It felt like someone sitting beside him in the dark, not speaking, just being there. He hated to admit it, but he slept easier than he had in months. Still, the conflict tore at him. During the day, he reminded himself, "This isn't fair. She forced this on me. I never chose her." But in the quiet hours, when her presence wrapped around him like invisible arms, another thought rose. Maybe I needed this more than I knew. One evening as they worked, David finally asked, "Why me? Out of everyone, why did you choose me?" Celira paused, looking at him with those glowing violet eyes. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Because you were alone, and because in your silence I saw a heart that still wished for someone to hear it. My people do not bond lightly. I chose you because I felt your soul call to mine." Her words left him speechless. He turned away, hiding the storm in his chest. He had wanted nothing but a simple assistant. Instead, he was bound to an alien girl who saw straight through him, who offered companionship he was too afraid to accept. And with every passing day, the wall he had built around his heart grew weaker. The days continued, and David's life felt more tangled with every passing hour. Celira worked beside him without complaint, moving with quiet strength, always present, always steady. To anyone else, she might have looked like the perfect partner, skilled, loyal, patient. But to David, the weight of her presence grew heavier. He wanted space. He wanted freedom. Yet everywhere he turned, she was there, not demanding, not loud, but constant. Her eyes followed him. Her hands reached out before he even asked, and her quiet bond wrapped around his mind every night like an invisible chain. One evening, as the two of them worked late in the workshop, something inside David finally snapped. He was repairing a faulty power regulator, his hands clumsy with exhaustion. When a spark burned his fingers, he cursed loudly and threw the tool across the bench. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice echoing against the metal walls. "I can't do this anymore. Celira looked up from her work, her face calm but her eyes sharp. Do what? This. David pointed at her, his voice trembling with frustration. You, always here, always watching, always calling me your mate like I don't have a choice. I never asked for this. I never agreed to any of it. For a long moment the workshop was silent. Celira stood still, her silver hair catching the light, her violet eyes unreadable. Then slowly she set down her tool and walked closer. You think I do not know choice? She asked softly. David's anger burned hotter. It doesn't feel like it. You talk about bonds and laws, but what about what I want? I wanted a simple assistant, not this complicated mess. Celira's gaze softened, though her voice carried quiet strength. I left my homeworld for this bond. My people do not leave their chosen. We are born among thousands, yet we may only ever choose one. I chose you. Her words struck him, but his pride pushed back. But why me? I'm nobody. Just a mechanic, just a man who wanted to be left alone. You could have chosen anyone else. She shook her head slowly. No. You think you are nobody, but when I looked at you, I saw someone who was drowning in silence. And I was drowning too. We both carried loneliness like a shadow. I chose you because your heart called to mine. Not out of law, but because I saw you. David's chest tightened, torn between anger and something deeper he refused to name. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. That's not fair. You can't just decide something like that for both of us. Celira stood quietly behind him. Then tell me, David, do you feel nothing when the bond touches you at night? Do you feel nothing when I am near? I do not force your heart. I only show you mine. Her words cut him to the core. Because he did feel something every night, every moment she was near. But admitting it felt like surrender, and surrender terrified him. His voice cracked as he snapped, I don't want this. I don't want you deciding my life for me. Celira's expression did not change, but for the first time her eyes flickered with pain. She bowed her head, her voice quiet. I hear you. And just like that, the bond in his mind faded. The soft warmth that had become so constant disappeared, leaving behind a silence heavier than anything he had known before. David stood frozen. He had demanded space, demanded freedom, and now he had it. Yet as Celira walked out of the workshop without another word, the emptiness wrapped around him like ice. That night, lying in his bed, the silence pressed against him so hard he could barely breathe. No presence lingered at the edges of his mind. No warmth reached across the darkness. For the first time since Celira had arrived, David was truly alone again, and it felt worse than before. The silence between David and Celira stretched into the next morning. She still came to the workshop, still moved with quiet grace, but something had changed. She no longer met his eyes. She no longer let her presence brush against his thoughts. She did her work in silence, and when evening came, she left without a word. David told himself this was what he wanted, freedom, distance. Yet each time she turned away from him, his chest ached in a way he could not explain. He didn't have time to think about it for long. Just after dawn on the third day, the colony alarms blared. The sharp sound split the air, a signal that froze everyone in place. David rushed outside with the others, his heart hammering. Above the colony, dark shapes descended. Raider ships fast and armed. Pirates from the outer belts. The sky filled with streaks of fire as they opened fire on the landing pads. Explosions shook the ground, throwing dust and smoke into the air. Colonists ran in panic, shouting, searching for cover. David's stomach twisted with fear. He had never been trained for war. He was just a mechanic. But before he could move, he saw her. Celira stood in the open courtyard, her body still as stone, her violet eyes glowing faintly. The wind pulled at her silver hair as the first wave of raiders leapt from their ships, weapons flashing. Celira, David shouted. Get down. But she didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward. When the raiders charged her, laughing at the sight of a lone girl, Celira moved like lightning. She disarmed one in a blur, her hands striking faster than David's eyes could follow. She kicked another aside with strength far beyond human, For a moment David could only stare. She was a storm, graceful and terrifying. But there were too many. Energy blasts lit the air and one grazed her side. Salira staggered, silver blood staining her clothes. David's fear overcame everything else. He ran to her, sliding behind a broken wall for cover, pulling her with him. He didn't think. He didn't plan. His body simply moved. Why? She whispered, her breath shaky as she pressed a hand to her wound. Because you're not just my assistant, David shouted, lifting a dropped blaster with trembling hands. He leaned out and fired wildly at the raiders. His aim was clumsy, but the shots kept them back. You're here with me, and I won't let them take you. Salira's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat he felt her bond flicker in his mind again, faint but warm. Together they fought. David was no soldier, but his stubborn courage kept him at her side. Salira, even wounded, moved with deadly precision, covering his mistakes, guiding his aim. The two of them, an ordinary human mechanic and an alien warrior bound by choice, held the line against enemies stronger and better armed. The colony's defense systems finally roared to life. Turrets turned, blasting at the raiders' ships. Sirens howled as militia reinforcements rushed to the fight. The pirates, realizing the element of surprise was gone, retreated back toward their ships, leaving chaos and smoke behind. When the last of them fled, David collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. His hands shook around the blaster, his heart racing. He turned to Salira. Her side still bled silver, her face pale, but her eyes were steady. You protected me, she whispered. David shook his head. No, we protected each other. He reached for her hand without thinking. It was warm despite the blood. In that moment, something inside him broke open. He realized the truth he had been running from. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't want the silence anymore. As colonists gathered around helping the wounded, David stayed at Salira's side. He pressed his forehead against hers for just a moment, feeling her breath on his skin. I was wrong, he whispered. I thought I wanted simple. I thought I wanted to be alone. But when I saw you fall, I knew. I can't be without you. Her lips trembled, and in his mind the bond flared again, stronger, alive. For the first time, David didn't fight it. He welcomed it. And in the ruins of the battle, among the smoke and broken stone, he realized he had already chosen her too. The battle was over, but the echoes of it lingered in David's chest. Smoke still drifted above the colony, and the air carried the sharp smell of burned metal. People were crying out for help, moving among the wreckage to gather the wounded. Yet David saw only Salira. She leaned against a broken wall, her silver blood still seeping from the wound on her side. Her violet eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. But even injured, she looked strong. Too strong for someone who had nearly fallen. David knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to press a cloth against her wound. Stay with me, he whispered, panic rising in his throat. Don't you dare leave me now. Her lips curved in a faint, tired smile. So, now you care? David's eyes stung. I've always cared. I was just too stubborn to admit it. Salira's gaze softened, but her voice was weak. You still do not wish the bond, I feel it. Your heart pulls close, then pushes away. You fear it. David froze, her words cutting into him like a blade. She was right, he had feared it. Feared losing his freedom. Feared being forced into something he didn't choose. But when the raiders had attacked, when he had seen her fall, all of that fear had vanished. What filled him instead was something deeper, sharper. I was afraid, he admitted quietly, pressing harder against the cloth. Afraid of losing myself. Afraid of not having a choice. But today, when I thought I'd lose you, I realized I was wrong. Salira blinked slowly, her eyes glistening with something he had never seen before. Tears. Wrong? David nodded, his voice breaking. I don't want to be alone anymore. You came into my life when I didn't ask, but maybe you were exactly what I needed. If you chose me, then let me choose you too. Her breath caught, and for the first time since she arrived, her calm mask cracked. Her lips trembled as her eyes filled with emotion. "You mean this, truly?" David took her hand in both of his, squeezing it tight. "Yes, I want you. Not as an assistant, not as a burden. As my partner, my equal." The bond that had been faint, broken, suddenly flared to life between them. It was not just a whisper at the edge of his thoughts now. It was a flood of warmth, a connection so strong he gasped aloud. For the first time, he didn't resist it. He welcomed it. Images flickered in his mind. Salira's memories, glimpses of her world, the loneliness she had carried before finding him. And beneath it all, he felt her heart steady and true, beating with his. Salira's tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Then we are no longer alone." David pulled her close, holding her carefully so as not to hurt her wound. In that embrace, the silence he had once thought he wanted was gone forever, and he did not miss it. Later, as colony medics arrived and treated her injury, David stayed at her side. The whispers of other colonists reached his ears, questions about who she was, what she had done, how she had fought like a warrior out of legend. But David didn't care about their whispers. All he cared about was the silver-haired alien whose hand never let go of his. That night, after the fires were put out and the colony finally settled into uneasy quiet, David and Salira sat together outside the workshop. The stars shone above them, bright and endless. David looked up at them, then at her. "You know, when I sent that request, I thought I wanted a machine, just something simple." Salira leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, her voice soft. "And instead you received me." He smiled, his chest tightening with a warmth he no longer feared. "Yeah, and I think I got the better deal." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bond pulsed softly between them, alive, unbreakable. David had thought he was nobody, a man meant to be forgotten on a lonely colony. But Salira had seen something in him, something worth choosing, and now at last he had chosen her back. The silence of his old life was gone. In its place was something new, something stronger, not loneliness, not emptiness, but us. The next morning the colony was quiet. The fires were gone, the ruins still smoking, and the people walked through the streets with heavy steps. The attack had left scars not just on the walls but on hearts. Yet for David, something had changed forever. He sat on the porch of his workshop, Salira resting beside him. Her wounds had been treated, and though she still moved carefully, her strength was returning. The morning light caught her silver hair, making it glow like threads of starlight. David had never thought he would feel at peace again. But now, with her hand resting in his, he felt whole. Salira broke the silence first. "You chose me," she whispered softly, as though she was still afraid it was a dream. "Even when you did not have to." David looked at her, his eyes steady. "I didn't just choose you, Salira. I chose us. I chose a future where I'm not alone. Where you're not alone either." Her eyes shimmered with emotion, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "On my world, choosing a mate is forever. It cannot be undone." David smiled faintly. "Sounds good to me. I don't want it undone." The bond between them pulsed warmly again, alive and steady. It wasn't a chain anymore. It wasn't a cage. It was a promise, shared, equal, unbreakable. But as the day passed, David noticed how the other colonists watched Salira. Some stared with awe, others with suspicion. She had saved them, yes, but she was still alien. She was still unknown. One man whispered loudly to another, "What is she? Can we trust her?" Another muttered, "She's dangerous. Did you see how she fought? Like a monster." David felt anger rise inside him, but Salira touched his arm gently. "Let them speak," she said calmly. "They do not know me. Not yet." Her patience surprised him, but he also knew it would not be easy. He had made his choice, but the colony had not. That evening, when the governor called a meeting in the square to thank those who fought, David stood with Salira at his side. Whispers spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. The governor, an older woman with tired eyes, spoke first. Yesterday we survived because of the bravery of many. But one stood above the rest. This alien, Salira. Without her, many of us would not be alive. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Some clapped hesitantly. Others remained silent. David stepped forward before doubt could spread further. His voice was rough but clear. You all know me. I've lived here for years. I was quiet, kept to myself. Maybe some of you thought I had nothing to give. But I found someone who believed I was worth more. And yesterday she proved it, not just to me but to all of you. He turned to Salira, then back to the crowd. She is not just my assistant. She is not just a warrior. She is my partner. And I trust her with my life. If you trust me at all, then trust her too. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a child stepped forward, a little girl carrying a broken toy. She walked up to Salira and held it out with trembling hands. Thank you. For saving my mom. Salira's eyes softened. She knelt slowly, accepting the toy with gentle care. It was my honor, she said, her voice warm. The crowd shifted again, but this time the whispers turned softer. Applause began, hesitant at first, then stronger. The colony wasn't fully ready, but something had changed. A seed had been planted. That night, back at the workshop, David and Salira sat once more under the stars. The bond between them was quiet, steady, like a heartbeat shared across two souls. Salira rested her head on his shoulder. Are you certain, David? This path is not easy. You may face doubt, fear, even hate because of me. David chuckled softly. I've faced worse. And besides, he tilted his head toward her, his voice gentle but firm. You're worth it. For the first time since she had come into his life, Salira's composure broke completely. She leaned into him, her shoulders shaking as tears slipped down her face, not of sorrow but of relief. David held her close, his hand stroking her hair. He knew now what he had never known before. Humanity's strength wasn't in ships, weapons, or machines. It was in connection. In choosing to stand together, even when the universe tried to tear them apart. All he had wanted was a simple assistant. But what he found was a partner, a bond and a love strong enough to face any darkness. And as the stars stretched endlessly above them, David finally understood. Humanity was never meant to walk alone. And neither was he.